So, let's just start off with the
Mhm.
the craziness of the news right now. Um, just give me your take on how the media can cover the
Yeah.
strategy of like just flood the zone and throw all of this at us at the same time. Like, what are we doing it? Is there something we should be doing differently, do you think?
Well, here's the problem. If we didn't have the experience from the first term, we would be doing this differently, right? And I think it's the experience from the first term that's impacting, I think, decision making of how to cover, what to cover here in the second term, right? There's everybody's thinks they've learned something. And I say that, right? Thinks they've learned something, right? Trump thinks he's learned how to do this from the first term to the second term, right? And in some ways he has, right? He came in much more prepared. He came in with, as I always go back, my favorite analogy with him and the presidency is that scene in the first Jurassic Park where they discover the dinosaurs test the electric fence and they never test it in the same spot. You're like, they're learning.
Hmm.
Um, and so I view that like, hey, whatever you think of him, the good and the bad, he's learned, right? He's
Yeah.
learned how to work the system. Frankly, it's similar to actually how the Bush won because Bush 43 with Dick Cheney, who had all this experience and understood the system, and of course he was playing within the rules of the Constitution, much more so. And I think people that were probably criticizing him at the time had no idea. Oh, you ain't seen nothing yet, right?
Right.
When
Right.
I think back to some of those alarmist type of coverage, when whatever you thought of what Dick Cheney was doing, he did care about it being within the bound what he believed was the bounds of the
Right.
Constitution. He
Right.
accepted that there were guardrails. We
Right.
may disagree where the guardrails were, but there was an acceptance of guardrails.
Hmm.
Now let's turn it from the press's perspective. I've been thinking about the famous, uh, you know, I guess you could call it a fable from our childhood. The sky is falling,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people think, hey, the intensity of the coverage of the first Trump term for what he was doing, why aren't we seeing a similar type of urgency with second Trump term? Well, I
That's a good
think
question. Yeah.
yeah, I think number one, the media companies have been neutered,
Hmm.
right? Number two, the public has less trust in these news organizations, and that has an impact on the humans that are covering it, right? At the end of the day,
Yeah.
we're all human beings, and I always say this about journalists. Journalists want a bigger audience, whatever audience they have, they want more.
Yeah.
And and it's sort of like, okay, and you figure out how I'm trying to get people to understand what's going on. How can I do it? All right, I'm not gonna yell and scream this time and say the sky is falling. Let me try it this way, right? And so I think everybody is trying to calibrate based on because look, I do fear that the reason why the public's more numb to what's happening a little bit, and frankly, why the media classes and even the political classes, because in hindsight, maybe there was an overreaction to Trump one in different ways. It was an
Yeah.
over, and so you have the whole sky is falling metaphor that I really believe it's just simply clouding.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it's just simply clouding things. So that said, I do believe politically, okay,
Hmm.
that this idea that James Carville has put out, which is sort of, hey, let him punch himself
Let
out,
him punch himself out. Yeah. Yeah.
and 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 sort of it sort of lets and react to when it happens versus reacting versus sort of doing this the way the movie Minority Report worked, which is getting upset about something that could happen
Right.
versus,
Heard.
frankly, waiting till it actually happens and then saying, see,
Yeah. But
this
there's
is
a
what we were
lot
talking
happening.
about. So I think I say this, I think all of that is in there. And
Right.
that is why we're in this sort of dazed soup in the moment.
Yeah. But there is so much actually happening right now. And so I guess
Well, I know what I would be centering coverage on.
yeah.
I think the most alarming aspect is Elon Musk.
Yes.
Okay, you have an
Exactly.
unelected. I mean, I referred to it with our friend Chris Eliza as I think this is a five-alarm fire for the system. This
Yeah.
is not about his politics. This is
Mhm.
about what if I told you George Soros
Exactly. Yep.
had all of his aides and people that worked for his investment fund working in the State Department, in Treasury, at
Yeah.
Justice. My goodness, what would
Exactly.
be happening in the United States Congress on the Republican side of the aisle?
Yeah.
And I do think, unlike the muted Republicans, there'd be Democrats who would loudly say, "Hey, this is a bad look.
Sure.
You really shouldn't be doing this."
Hmm.
There are, I do think if this were Trump won, you'd have more Republicans. And if it was the Republican Party that was there in even 16 and 17,
Right.
right, the Bob Corkers of the world would be upset about this, right? You'd have that wing of the party, which has been, he said, I mean, right now it's Todd Young, Lisa Murkowski, Bill Cassidy, Tom Tillis, and Snow. And you can
Mhm.
see it in Tillis, right? He feels the pressure of, does he want to stay a senator?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And you see the tension in him.
Hmm.
And Cassidy right now, same thing that's happening, him being the swing vote on Kennedy.
Hmm.
So I do think that, um, the, so I think what you have to do is when you have this sort of machine gun like, right, it's just sort of spraying all of this stuff everywhere.
Yeah.
Um, you really got to focus on what matters, and I'm not saying the other stuff doesn't matter, right?
Right.
Hard stop.
Right.
But you've got to focus on what's the what's both, I think, the biggest issue
Hmm.
generally, and it's Elon Musk. Like, there's
Yes.
no two ways about it. This is unconstitutional,
Right.
um, but it's border. I mean, it's just this is everything we were told that Teddy Roosevelt was fighting against,
Hmm.
right? Like this is,
Exactly.
and I don't think anybody thinks this is a good idea. Look, I'm pretty convinced the public's going to turn on this.
Right.
Um, but I also believe the public, like some of the Democrats, like some in the press, have also tuned out. I don't know if,
Yeah.
anecdotally, I mean, they're all just saying, wake me when
But it's
there's really
over.
something, when it's
Yeah.
something to be outraged about.
Yeah.
But I think Musk to me is the story I'd be I would be, if I were calling the shots, I'd be like, this is the story.
Hmm.
Because everything is a derivative of of essentially what Musk touches right now, right?
Right.
So if you focus there, it gets you to AID, it gets you to Treasury, it gets you
Right.
to the contractors, it gets you to all these things. So I think I certainly would be, if I were managing out of the Washington Post, Wall Street, and you're starting to see it, right? The Wall
Mhm.
Street Journal, going on this.
Yeah.
Um,
But you're also
Now,
seeing an
by the
attack
way,
on,
politically, it's brilliant of Trump
yeah, it is.
because Musk's the bad guy,
Exactly.
and we all know at some point Trump will throw him under the bus,
Yeah, absolutely.
and when it becomes too inconvenient, like
Yeah.
there's no doubt that that's going to happen. The question is, how much damage has been done, and
Right.
I look.
Where are the Democrats? Are you hearing anything from
Yeah, I mean, I think it's because
what's
it's a mixed
happening?
bag. The
Yeah.
party is divided
Yeah.
on how to deal with Trump, right? Half of them say, hey, my constituents like the issues he's focused on.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. And I don't want to fight him on this. And you don't want to get caught defending something that, while principally you should defend, is just not popular in the public, right? Right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the box they're in.